Good morning, everyone. Welcome here today. I'm Charlotte. I work with the Association for Rental Living, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar today to mark International Women's Day 2025. Thank you to everyone for joining today, to our host, Stephanie Smith, Head of Residential at Muse Places, and Association for Rental Living Board Member and EDI Chair, and to our wonderful panellists today, Odile Abo, Managing Director of Populate, Director and Board Member at Socius, Alex Baxter, Product Manager at Invesco, Maria Hatch, Senior Director, Client Relationships Europe at Greystar, and Nicola Fleetmilne, Founder and CEO, Fleetmilne, Chair of the Colmore BID, and Association for Rental Living Midlands Hub Chair. The theme of this year's webinar is Accelerating Action in the Rental Living Sector. And during this fireside chat, we'll take a look at what's happening in the rental living sector to accelerate equity in the workplace, what challenges teams are facing, and how the sector is helping mentor and support the next generation. We welcome questions and feedback, so please do share your views using the Q&A function. Now I'll hand over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you, everyone, for joining our celebration of women in this year's Fireside Chat. Equally, thank you to the ARL for the kind invite to join again this year, hosting another stellar panel in honor of International Women's Day, really diving in to discuss how we can accelerate action and creating a more equitable workplace. I actually look forward to this every year now, as I've had the pleasure of gathering women who I personally find inspiring as leaders, admire as just really amazing people who are passionate about lifting up others and our industry. And I think there's always the relevant question people ask: why is International Women's Day needed? Haven't we made progress? And the simple answer is that yes, some progress has been made, but there's still a disparity in the UK and a marked gap globally on equal rights protection. And while we have seen advancement in organizations over the past years, we do also need to recognize that
Oh dear,
Oh,
we've lost.
she's got out, hasn't she? Okay, but it was just me.
No, I think
Okay.
we've lost her, but hopefully she's just sorting that out.
We can introduce ourselves if that's easier.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Should we do that?
Yeah. Technology, hey? Oh, we got her back.
my apologies.
Oh, there you go.
Apparently Zoom thinks it's Friday as well. I don't know what we lost me, but I will say that, while we were talking about some advancement in organizations over the past years, we also need to recognize that, if we think about the UK's built environment sector, women only make up 17% of the workforce, and in construction only 2%. The gender pay gap, while showing some slight improvement, does remain a persistent issue, with data showing a median gap of around 15.4% in architectural firms, 23% gap in construction. And a 2024 report by Dezeen highlights that gender pay gap in architecture studios with 100 or more staff is 16%, which is higher than the overall UK average. The proportion of female UK-based investment professionals hit 27% last year, which is up from 24% a year earlier, which is great. And that's according to the latest diversity report from Level 20 and the British Private Equity and Venture Capital Association. Bit of a mouthful there. Women now hold 15% of senior investment roles, which is up from 12% in 2023. However, the financial sector has the highest pay gap of over 24%. It's also worth noting that the Randstad report in 2022 revealed that 72% of women have either encountered or witnessed inappropriate behavior from male colleagues. And the 2024 report by the Young Women's Trust found that 53% of young women have experienced discrimination at work, and this is a 3-year high gap. In an effort to address the disparity in the workplace, the government has announced the Office for Equality and Opportunity in October of 2024. This is a huge progress step, which will lead on the overall framework of equality legislation for the UK. There is also the new Employee Rights Bill progressing through Parliament, and a conference on the women's right in workplace has been announced actually for the end of March. The event will bring policymakers and stakeholders together discussing the latest developments and priorities for promoting women's equality in UK workplaces. It will also be a great opportunity to examine the direction of policy under the new government. So this year, the 100th anniversary of the International Women's Day hits home even more on a personal note. Given some of the step backs that we've seen globally, where women have rights slipping away every day, including in my own home country, where EDI programs, which used to be some of the top in the world, women's health and identities are now being compromised on an accelerated rate every day. And some countries have even seen extreme movements of not being allowed to access education or even speak in public. This day is to celebrate all women's strength and to champion for those who don't have a voice or aren't allowed to have a voice as well. The truth is, if conversations stop or are not allowed to be had in a constructive manner, then there is a tangible risk of sliding backwards. So in that spirit, I'm honored to welcome this exceptional group of peers today, where we will hear about their journey, share experiences, explore the benefits of a diverse workplace, and share ideas on how to build a more inclusive industry. So welcome, ladies, and thank you for joining me today. Please do tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your organization. Why don't we start with Alex, please?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Stephanie. So my name's Alex Baxter. I'm a digital product manager at Invesco. And most of the time when I kind of say I'm a digital product manager, I guess I'm met with blank expressions. I also don't think that even after kind of 4 years, I've really managed to sort of finesse my explanation, as I often find that I'm still met with confused expressions when I do try to describe it. But essentially, I kind of sit in the intersection between sort of technology, marketing, and business strategy, where I'm kind of sort of responsible for developing and managing digital products, so apps, platforms, AI tools, things like that. But I guess it's funny, really, when I think about my journey, because I now exist in kind of a world of tech and a world of finance. But had you asked me sort of what a fund was on my first day or what an API was, I mean, I probably would have, I definitely would have and did have a completely blank expression on my face. I had no clue. I came from English and history, I joined on what was called the I-2020 investment scheme, which is at its core about recruiting sort of diverse talent and skills into the investment world. So, actively getting people who probably wouldn't have traditionally actually had access to that world and who wouldn't normally be there into that space. And it's wonderful. It was wonderful, and it was a wonderful scheme. It still is. But it does very, very little to kind of quiet the voice in your head when, you turn up on the first day and your voice is saying, no, seriously, Alex, what the heck are you doing here? You shouldn't be here. Everyone knows that you are a massive imposter in this situation. And, certainly for a while, these worlds did feel really impenetrable. I mean, they literally have their own languages. They have, jargon, which frankly, if you don't know, you'll be damned if you're capable of kind of participating in a conversation. But I always consider myself incredibly lucky to have landed where I did in a network of, incredibly strong female role models at the time. So from my manager to my mentor, who kind of on a daily basis reaffirmed, you should be here and you're here for a reason because of the skill set that you bring. And I know, Stephanie, I know you didn't want me to kind of sit here and name drop, but Stephanie was my first mentor. And frankly, it's a testament to the strength of the mentor relationship that I'm here today and in a point in my career where I'm almost able to empower her back. That's not really a good sentence, but really be kind of a living testimony for that mentorship program and mentorship programs in general. Don't know why I said living testimony, as if people don't typically survive their mentor, but living testimony. But yeah, I went on, and I like to think I'm still on an incredible learning curve, a steep learning curve, where every single day, I do have to actively quiet that inner voice that tells me I shouldn't be there, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, but it's helped me by being kind of situated from the get-go in such a strong network of women. So yeah, it's great to be here today to share some of those experiences.
Thank you, Alex. And yeah, I mean, I have to say it was an honor meeting you and being part of your journey. And maybe sometimes, we'll talk about mentorship as well, but just thinking about those moments when we, what the heck am I doing? Kind of imposter syndrome moments. And I know already, we'll turn to you a little bit, and I know you and I've had some similar experience where we've gone from that very operational world, jumping in to development and being a female in a largely male dominated industry, kind of going in with a different skill set, something that you've absolutely inspired me about as well. And I'd love to hear a little bit about you, what you're doing. It's quite exciting, and just I guess a bit about your journey.
Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me to join this. I really appreciate it. So I'm Alida Abo. I'm a MD of Populate and also sit on the directors board for Socius. And like you, Alex, I had a very untraditional route into my industry, into real estate. I studied sociology and I studied comms, and that was my world. Ended up quite a squiggly route, ended up in real estate, and I still sometimes see myself as an outsider sometimes. But I think I've become much more comfortable with that, actually, because I think the diversity of experiences that we bring to any sector we work in is really important. So what some people will take a traditional route in, taking a different route in means you come with a different perspective. I've become a lot more comfortable. It's taken a while, but I'm much more comfortable with kind of leaning into the fact that I just see things in a different way. Populate, which is the company that I currently run, was born out of that real passion to think about people, not just buildings. Real estate is a very kind of, it is a very tangible, but it wants to focus on the physicality of things. And I was always coming from a place of, well, what about that? What about Sally and John and Susie? That's what I see the world through that lens. So that's why I think that balance is really important. I suppose the other thing also is to mention is I am a generalist, and I don't have a specific specialism. And again, I think that's also taken me a while to get comfortable with. And I think especially in the industry I work in, where you're kind of put into you're a surveyor, or you're a salesperson, or you're an architect, or you tend to get put in roles, which is perfectly fine. But when you're not, you kind of don't really know where you sit. But I've become a lot more comfortable with that, and I'm definitely encouraging much more people to kind of to lean into that kind of as a strength.
Thank you, Olivia. And I think your journey has been really quite interesting. And I think the inspiration behind Populate is really where forward-thinking developers need to go. Really thinking about that greater community, which we'll touch on in a little bit as well. Nicola, you and I have known each other since just after I moved here, and I've always had the pleasure of working with you, kind of across the industry and then within the industry body as well. Your story about starting your own business, getting out there 20 years ago now, which is huge. And building this organization that's so trusted within the industry. I'd love to hear about you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Morning, everybody. My business, I started up actually 21 years ago. Next week, it is our birthday. And actually, my business was actually born out of frustration with the situation I found myself in. I was a young female in a very heavily dominated world by men. And things are very, very different these days, certainly within the firms that I deal with. But at the time, there was almost like a dismissiveness, I guess, towards females leading departments, that kind of thing. So without going into the massive detail around that, it led me to that sort of anger and frustration meant, right, I can do this myself. I can do this better. You know how people always ask you, if you knew back then what you knew now, would you do it again? Yeah, I would. I just would get more things right earlier on. So, but yeah, it's been a fun 21 years. In the meantime, as Charlotte said, I also chair, so I wear other hats outside of work, chair the Cornwall Business Improvement District. That was an interesting one because the chief exec worked on me for over a year to persuade me to run for chair, because like Alex was describing earlier, I was absolutely obsessed with the idea that I wasn't the right person. I didn't have the right presence, gravitas, knowledge. And she just kept saying to me, you really do. It's under there. And although she wasn't an official mentor, she was very much a mentor to me, saying, come on, you honestly trust yourself. You have all of the right skills for this. And with the team at the bid, we'll uncover all of that stuff. And I took over January 2020, and what a ride the first couple of years were, because it was just all about COVID. But now I've completed 5 years of chair there, and it's been incredible, and I feel so supported. And I look back and think, why did I question myself? But I think it's natural, and there's something humble about it, not in a twee kind of way, but it's almost my way of checking myself, making myself be sure that when I go for something, and we've all heard the stats before, women only go for a job when they know they can do 90% of it, but a man will go for it when they can do maybe 50, 60%. And actually that's where I'm comfortable. I need to know that I can do quite a lot of that role, so that I'm not throwing myself in the deep end and terrified on day one. Having said that, actually I feel like in the end I did just go, to heck with this, and I'm going in the deep end. But it's been really amazing, to be honest. And as a reciprocal scenario, I'm constantly trying to reach out to younger females, or even females who perhaps are doing return to work after having kids, where that confidence isn't where it needs to be. So it might just be that it's lowered a little, or they're questioning, actually, have I got it in me? So I'm constantly trying to lift women up. My own business has, as those of you who know me, has a lot of females in it, because they're brilliant. They're really good at what they do. And return to work mums are the best, because my gosh, their negotiation skills are top tier when you are negotiating with small children. So yeah, I think that's probably enough about me, but that's kind of a little bit of what I'm about.
Absolutely. And I mean, you've really, I know I always call you the heart of Birmingham, but you have become really that trusted person within the industry up in the Midlands to, kind of, when new people are starting up there, instantly, do you know Nicola? Like, you need to meet her and kind of learn more about the industry and the opportunities up there. And so thank you for bringing that energy and sharing your story. I mean, I think you're right. We do all hit those moments where, like, okay, I, am I in the right spot? What have I gotten myself into? Do I give up? No, keep pushing on. And Maria, I mean, you are also a member of the DI committee, which I'm so thrilled about. You bring so much value to it. And I know that you've been doing some really amazing things over at Greystar as well, but please do share your story with us.
Yeah, hi everybody. Firstly, thank you for having me. I hope you can all hear me okay. So I'm Maria, I work for Greystar, and I look after our sales department across both the PBSA and the BTR side of the business for Europe. I think, like most people on this call, quite literally fell into real estate. It's definitely not something that I went out and tried to achieve. At university, I studied sports science and philosophy as a double honours, so it probably couldn't have been further from this world. I've been at Greystar for 9 years and real estate for nearly 15. And previously to that, I was actually a tennis coach. So I got injured playing tennis, and was coaching near Notting Hill, and I found David Game College back then, who I became their accommodation manager, and the story started there. So then I fell into Greystar after a few roles after that. And I can completely understand, what everybody's saying on the call. I think it's a real estate, and to Alexandra's point earlier, it sort of has its own language. So I remember very clearly starting in some of these roles I've been in, and everybody using acronyms that I honestly didn't understand. Google was my best friend, still is. Googling everything left left, right, and centre, and saying the right things at the right time, potentially to sound cleverer than I was, I think. But Nicola, to your point, the industry has changed. It's still got a way to go, I think, and it's an interesting one, isn't it? Like, I've often been nervous in new roles that I can't fulfil what I think a company or a partner might want me to fulfil. And actually, after conversations this week, I wonder, looking back over the last sort of 10, 15 years, how much of that is actually just my own pressure on myself, because I want to always try and be one step ahead of the game, or appear like I am always one step ahead of the game, because I'm conscious that can't always be the case. So yeah, I'm sure we'll speak about that in a little while. But Steph, thank you for the invite, and ALR, thank you for having me. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, and thank you, Maria. You touched on some really important elements there, and I do think that, you're right when we think about Wonder Woman syndrome. So, from my own experience growing up in the U.S. market, right? Especially in places like New York, where I grew up, you are used to working, and you essentially live to work. You don't work to live, which is a cultural aspect that I really had to get used to when I moved over here, of that shift and that respect of, no, actually you can have your weekends. You don't have to sit there working, every single day until 9 o'clock at night. And I think sometimes I did it to myself, because I wanted to prove myself, because I think there was that little voice in the back of my head. A little bit about my background for people who aren't aware. I didn't finish uni. I was going to school for music therapy, and life got in the way, as it can do. And I would never change that, because it's led to some really amazing things within my life. But off of the back of that, I was actually a returning mom to work when I fell into real estate, and I walked in looking for an apartment in Denver, Colorado. And the leasing agent just said, "Oh, as we do, as we're qualifying," she said, "Well, do you work nearby?" And I said, "Well, I talked about my partner, and this is where he works." And I said, "But I'm actually looking to go back to work. My daughter's old enough now." And she said, "Oh, we're looking for a part-time leasing agent." And I fell in love with it. Ended up using my experience, and funny enough, much of the psychology and business management classes that I had taken in school and whatnot, and applied that over to this realm, and found that I was so passionate about helping people find home. So here I am, many, many years later. But there was that element of, I need to push myself. I didn't come from the same socioeconomic background as some people did. And very often some of the first questions were, "Well, what university did you go to?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't finish university," and so there was always that little nagging voice in the background of maybe pushing myself a little bit harder, Wonder Woman syndrome. You know, and already, for instance, when I know you and I had conversations about sometimes that fear of showing vulnerability, that we're human, being seen as like, "Oh, maybe I do need a bit of help." So, have you had experience like that, especially as you've been building this career, this exceptional career within the industry? You're on mute.
You know better, right? It's really interesting when you talk about vulnerability, and I was having a conversation with someone recently, because I think, not meaning to be gendered, but I do find that sometimes as a woman, we struggle to be vulnerable, because of this kind of superwoman kind of approach. And I think sometimes, I think Maria might have said it, I think sometimes I think we put it on ourselves sometimes, because we feel like we have to be perfect. You've got to get everything right. You've got to do it 150% best, and that pressure that we put on ourselves is tough, and sometimes it's self-imposed. But I do think culture also kind of imposes this idea of perfection on women, and when you're showing vulnerability, sometimes feels feels weak, and we do worry about, oh, if I just say I can't do it, or if I say I'm really exhausted because I've been up all night with a baby, or I might not be treated in the same way. So I do think vulnerability is a really tough one. I don't think women get a fair treatment when you show vulnerability, but I think it's really important in our workplaces, because we are human, and recognizing that we don't have to be 100% every time, and we're not, and we don't have to put on a fake front when you're struggling. So I think whilst culturally sometimes it's challenging, I'm much more, I prefer to to create an environment where we can be vulnerable, we can be honest about our feelings, we can talk about the things that are bothering us on our mind, and creating that culture for me is much more human and leads to better, more supportive, more nicer environments to be in. So that, but I just think there is a cultural issue that we've got to address, especially in some of the environments that we work in, where you've got to be seen as, no, I've got it all together, it's all on point, I don't have any issues, it's all fine.
Yeah, I would interject to say that I think there's also work to be done around the idea of what being vulnerable actually is, because to your point, Alay, that there is, as women we see vulnerability as a weakness, as something to be hidden, but actually we probably learn our best lessons and improve ourselves the most at the moments where we slightly drop our guard and the person we're dealing with sees that actually we're looking to learn. We are not, because for me, and we absolutely agreed, there's no men bashing in this session, not at all. But as a general idea, quite often I see vulnerability in men in a very different way, which is that they will persist through a topic that it becomes clear to me that they are unsure what either the outcome needs to be, or even what they're talking about. And yet for me, that's them being vulnerable. They are worrying that someone will find out that they don't know, as opposed to just saying, do you know what? I don't know the answer to that. Do you? And then we learn together and we all move on a lot quicker. So, I'm sure the world could be a much better place if we were more prepared, more comfortable, more confident to say, as soon as, actually, I don't know what that is. You're using a TLA and I don't know what that particular thing is. The minute I know, then we can move on. But it's that sort of drawing it out and pretending, actually, I'm absolutely fine. I know what you're talking about. And actually that for me is where men often show their vulnerability, but they don't realize it.
I also think just the whole concept of sort of the Wonder Woman is quite interesting, because I find myself towing a line between trying to maintain this idea of looking like I've got everything together and being perfect and no mistakes. But at the same time, on a daily basis, I find myself, and I'm guilty of it, I've been accused of doing this thing where I'm microaggressive to myself in everything I say. So I'm always putting myself down. Before I say any kind of sentence, I'll kind of precede it with, this probably isn't going to make sense, or I'll finish the sentence with, I know that didn't make sense, and rambling on, and kind of always just slightly putting myself down, almost to be like, okay, it stops me from, if I can call out my own mistake before I've even made it, you can't say that I've made a mistake because I know that I've made a mistake. So it's like, I find myself being the more humble I can be to almost try get across my opinion. But it's a really bizarre balance between trying to seem perfect by undercutting myself so that no one can call me out for not being perfect, because I've always addressed it already.
Culturally, men have tend to be brought up to believe that that's not necessary. Yeah. Whereas culturally, there is a slant towards females feeling like they ought to almost apologize when they know better.
Exactly, and almost apologize for their presence as well. Yeah. Like, the smaller you can be, the less intrusive you can be, the better. Otherwise, you're but
isn't it mad that you would? I bet none of us are like that at home. I bet none of us apologize for knowing what is the right thing to do at home. Like, we're all quite confident there.
Yeah.
It's just that step into the workplace where it's just kind of subliminally got into our systems that you're politer at work, and you take your steps carefully, and you apologize if you're about to correct somebody. But
I mean,
absolutely not.
I read a brilliant blog about the way that women communicate through emails. And so how we see an appropriate email is, exclamation marks or no worries if you can't kind of thing, or like if you want to say hi Steve with just like a comma is too stern. You want to have hi Steve, like exclamation mark, so that you're never intruding. And it's a really interesting dynamic between the way that men and women communicate over email, which is fascinating. But I don't know why we feel the need to, you know, not, I don't know.
Emotionally intelligent.
Yeah.
And we know that sometimes when you look like you're not pressurizing somebody, they actually feel like they ought to do the thing.
Yeah.
So,
When I first moved here culturally, of course, you know, being from America, being from New York State, I do have a very large personality. Anybody who's been around me for 5 minutes knows that. And I remember actually a fantastic conversation. I was a little bit quiet in a meeting, and I don't know if he even remembers this moment. I'd only been here for about a year, and I was sitting there in a meeting, and I was a little bit quieter. It was actually more because I was recovering from a nasty cold, and I was, to be honest, a little bit afraid that I was going to start coughing if I started talking too much. And I remember after the meeting, and one of the people I was in the meeting with, he said, "You're doing okay." And I said, "Yeah, yes, I'm just feeling a little under the weather still." And he said, "Okay, I just wanted to make sure that you weren't losing who you are." And he goes, "Don't ever curb who you are just because you're in a different country." He said, "You know, your energy brings so much to the room." And it really helped hearing that, because I think it was also at that moment, having been here for kind of a year and having those moments of like, because it was such a different world for me in many ways, even though it was positive overall, there were still those moments of homesickness and like, you know, feeling sometimes a fish out of water. And Maria, to your point earlier, you know, the acronyms and things like that getting embedded into new companies, and you know, little things we can do in the workplace. You know, thinking about starting up, you know, a glossary and breaking down some of those and making other people aware in meetings. You know, I know you and I had discussed this before, but even if somebody brings up something, you know, some acronym, kind of clarifying in the meeting for new people in the room. But
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to hear about what you're doing with Greystar as well on some of those other initiatives to really kind of, because you do have a lot of young new staff coming in. How are you setting that pace and just learning from what you experienced?
Yeah, I think, you know, what everyone's referred to really is the culture of a business, isn't it? And I think it's really important, you know, when you have new starters, whether they be male or female or wherever they're from, to make people feel comfortable. And I think, you know, just to reference the real estate world in general, it doesn't slow down. So I think we all know that, like, it's 100 miles an hour all the time. Everybody's in fast-paced environments. So sometimes I just don't know, as an industry, if we give people that are new to the industry or transferring across, you know, the time that they need to onboard properly. And I think that's something Greystar is really looking at the moment, is how does our onboarding program, one, make people feel comfortable, but two, how do you embed that from like site level all the way to the top of corporate? Because it's something that can get really left behind. And, you know, Alexandra, to your point earlier, where you were saying that often people apologise, I find that a lot with new starters. You know, it's like, and actually, we often bring people into our business because they're either great or or new to the industry or not. They could come up with ideas that could change the industry, right? So every idea is a good idea if it hasn't already been said or done, because it's a USP. So I think we need to, as an industry, sometimes take a step back and listen to what people are saying and not assume that we know the answer. I think we're very quick at saying, like, this role should be delivering that. So if you're speaking outside of your role, like, are you the right person to be having that conversation? And actually, 9 times out of 10, yeah, you probably are the right person to be having that conversation. I also think that at Greystar, we're trying to adopt, and I think we do this quite well actually at the moment, but like a challenging environment. If you feel like you need to challenge somebody on something, it doesn't mean you need to call them out in front of the room, right? But that could just be like, have you thought about this, or have you thought about that? And I think everybody's trying to get rid of the meeting culture, as in having a meeting for a meeting. But I really do think one-to-ones are very important, and, you know, mentoring, I know we've spoken about that, but the aim is to create a culture where people feel comfortable and allow people to be themselves, because you have got a job because you are yourself. 9 times out of 10, it's not actually because what you've been delivered in the past, it's because they like who you are. So Steph, to your point, we have to allow and create environments that people feel like they can be themselves, and then work secondly, I think.
And I think that also creating that comfortable space to have those conversations, you know, it allows us to celebrate the diversity of our group and that lived experience that everybody's bringing in. I mean, if you look at some of the stats, you know, FTSE 250 companies, they're more likely those that have these really strong programs in place and have, even if they're on a journey and they're acknowledging that they're not completely where they want to be yet, but they're communicating and they're doing it as effectively as they possibly can while getting that buy-in, you know, they're performing 36% better than other companies. So there's a viable, you know, financial aspect to this too. It's not just the soft and fluffy of making people feel nice. And you know, if I think to one example, I had a phenomenal colleague who he was off for a couple days for Diwali, and I asked him. I mean, I kind of knew the premise, but growing up, I didn't have a lot of exposure to information about Diwali and whatnot. And so I just asked him. I said, "I hope you don't mind me asking." I said, "But I know what it's about, but I'd really love to hear about your experience with it." Because he did grow up in India and he had gone back to spend time with his family during this period. And seeing the joy that it brought to his face and the pride of like, you know, actually telling us that shared experience and what it means to them as somebody who's grown up in that culture. You know, and if he had said, I honestly don't necessarily feel comfortable, or please just Google it, like I would have respected that. But again, it's celebrating the differences of what we have. And I think that sometimes there's a fearfulness to actually maybe approach those conversations. So I'd love to hear a little bit maybe from each of you about where you might have experienced either unconscious bias, or you had to have a conversation, or maybe just tactics on how to approach and create that environment.
Do you want me to go first?
Sure. Sorry, I didn't call on anybody specifically. I know you all have things running through your brains right now.
Gives everybody a bit of thinking time as well. So, unconscious bias is a really hard one because it's unconscious. So, I have a couple of friends who are like my allies across sort of differences. So, for example, I've got a black male friend, so I am neither male nor black, and so we spend time talking about stuff where we're either checking each other or we are trying to explain things to one another, because, you know, he doesn't always get kind of the girl thing. I sometimes, you know, as a white girl, I don't always get what the black challenge is in the industry, etc. So it's for me, it's not always that I know what that unconscious bias is. It's about having those allies who will say to me, do you know that that's not what you should say? Or do you understand the history to what you're saying? Or do you understand the impact of what you're saying? That you're saying it casually, but actually there's a bigger impact here, and how to phrase myself better. And I self-judge anyway, obviously, but I want to make sure that I'm always learning. I don't want to be really casual about this. I don't want to sort of glide through life thinking that just everything is just as I experience it. I have a decent sized team, and I really want, Stephanie, we've talked about this on like the EDI side of things. I really want like cross culture in my team, because it really, really does bring out innovation in a different way. So I don't want to find that we're just doing the same old, because everybody there is on that exact same path. They've got the same background. I mean, you made the point earlier that the socioeconomic background differences, even something like that, really brings a different perspective. So for me, it's all about be open to learning, be constantly on the watch for where actually I don't think I know on this particular point well enough. I'm sure everyone has. I was chatting to a friend the other day, and she said she hates posting on LinkedIn because she's terrified of saying the wrong thing. And I was like, look, just first of all, maybe you don't march in there on day one with your political views on Trump, for example, because there are some things that are very polarizing. But, you know, start easy, be gentle, and find the spaces where perhaps somebody else is saying something that you haven't a thought on. And I think as women, we are more careful about how we phrase responses because we're very emotionally led in the main. We don't want to upset people. Just because we don't necessarily agree with them doesn't mean we want to go in there and slap them. You know, we actually prefer conversation generally than actually combat. You know, so anyway, I hope I've given everybody else lots of thinking time.
I think you bring up an interesting point, Nicola, because the important thing is, again, as part of that, creating an environment of comfort and trust is also about making sure that people understand it's okay to disagree sometimes. Like, you know,
It's essential to disagree. Otherwise, the world is an incredibly boring place and really won't move forward.
And it's disagreeing with respect, isn't it? It's that, and I think I'm one of those people when everyone goes, "Oh, we're all the same," and I always go, "Actually, we're not." I don't, because I think if you see me as the same, you don't recognize my differences and the things that make me special or the things that make me unique, and similar things that make you unique. So actually, we're not the same, we are different, and we have different taste buds, we like different things, and celebrating and recognizing that, I think, is really important, rather than creating this like we're all vanilla the same. No, we're not. So I think exactly being able to kind of respect that difference and create an environment where that's accepted, that I like Beyonce, you don't like her, we can have a good old full-on argument about it, but actually we can still walk away going, oh well, I still think she's rubbish and you still think she's amazing. So, but I think it's really important to create that culture that it's okay to be different. Let's not try to create everybody who's a cookie cutter of one another, because we aren't.
Yeah, and you're right about creating culture where people are comfortable to be able to say that. Sorry, Maria.
No, apology. I think I completely agree with that, and that's such an education piece, right? And I think we all have a responsibility in our businesses to make sure, like, I know Steffi and I have spoken about this before, but from like a DE&I perspective, like, are we doing enough to educate the workplace on why these things are so important? Like International Women's Day is an example of, like, you could often get like the eyes rolling, like, why do we have to have a day? Like, why is that a thing? Like, it's not a thing for us. And it's the same with Pride Month, and it's the same with so many things across the business, right? There's so much that we need to really, Black History Month, there's so much we need to focus on, but it's about allowing people the time to be educated as well. Like, don't put events on all the time that are like at 8 o'clock in the evening when people have to go home. Like, allow people to be educated and make it relevant. So to your question of unconscious bias, like, it's quite difficult sometimes to see that or to notice that or call it out, because you have to make it relevant to the workplace you're in. So I think people giving examples like in a live situation and being able to say like, oh, that's a bit, probably shouldn't say that, like, because it might have made this person feel like this. Like, what's the consequence of saying that is really important, because otherwise it's just like, oh, okay, well, sorry, I didn't realise, like, I won't do it again. You have to understand that's made somebody feel a certain way because you possibly don't have the education around the history of that or around why that's important to somebody. So I think it's really important that every workplace takes responsibility to continue that and drive that forward.
Sometimes it comes down to being in a meeting and maybe you notice that little microaggression of somebody always being spoken over, and there is a real consequence to that. Sooner or later that person will stop talking and stop sharing those ideas, and they may have phenomenal ideas that can actually bolster your business even more. And thinking about how we address those, sometimes it's outright going, did you really just say that? Or can you repeat that? Because sometimes people might go, oh, wait a minute, maybe I said that wrong. Maybe they honestly didn't mean to say it in the way that they did. Maybe sometimes they think it's a joke, but sometimes the joke isn't okay. And it can lead to that undercurrent of, kind of minimizing somebody's talent. And we never want that. And other times it's a very simple silence and a raised eyebrow, a well-placed silence, as they say, and then addressing it later, kind of knowing when to read the room. But I've tried to also be that person who, if I notice that somebody's being spoken over in a meeting, especially somebody who's maybe junior and not necessarily as confident, to kind of turn to them and just go, oh, sorry, you weren't finished yet. And and make sure that also if they're not in the room and we're having a meeting and there's an idea that comes to the table going, oh yes, so and so came up with, it was discussing that with me the other day. I think it's a fantastic initiative. How do we make that happen? How do we support them? And making sure that they're not kind of closed out of this element, because I think sometimes people do it subconsciously. They might hear an idea and then they run with it, and sometimes that other person who originally came up with the idea is all of a sudden pushed to the side and not recognized for the really great things that they're bringing to the table. Yeah, I mean, and I do think that, Nicola, you were talking about allyship earlier, and I think that that is one of the ways that, kind of seeding your ally, if you are going into a meeting as well, and maybe you aren't as confident, or could be uh, just a little bit of nervousness, a bit of social anxiety, for instance, and just going into a meeting and knowing who your ally is. And as you're, talking about a difficult subject, maybe looking at them or, kind of prepping them going, oh, can you feed into this as well? So that way, you can help to get that buy-in, and maybe they can even prompt you if because of that nervousness, you forgot a piece of it that you wanted to share, but you had brainstormed with them before. So I think there are a lot of really simple kind of ways that companies can set these things up. And again, this goes back to organizations not being afraid to say, look, this is a journey. We want to hear your voices. We may not have all the answers right now, but we do care and we do want to move things on. I mean, things like women's health, starting up, for instance, my company has a menopause program, and they also have a women's health or, piece of the organization to help support people going through different aspects, whether that is, somebody has a major life event, illness, or it could be something that has to do with family planning, or it could be, as I said, kind of going through menopause periods. And actually, it's not even just for the women in the organization. There are a lot of men who participate in that because they've said point blank, I feel like it makes me a better partner as well, because they don't understand it. And maybe sometimes in the heat of things, when, stresses and everything in the home take place, they may not have the capacity or that moment to kind of stop and go, wait, explain that more. So, yeah. And Alex, I know that you've been obviously thinking about, communicating and how you're getting buy-in from a lot of people from different parts of the organization. And, I mean, a little bit about how you do that and really kind of understanding your audience.
Well, I mean, it's difficult because I feel like across the organization, everybody has their own way of communicating. And it's very challenging in the sense that you can never get used to one form of communication because you're constantly having to read people in different situations, different teams. And when we kind of talk about sort of, unconscious bias, there are certain areas and certain teams which are, say, more dominated by men. And actually, you walk into a situation, you're fully confident in who you are because your team respects you. And you walk into the situation and you're trying to deal with a team in a certain department, and they will not address you. They will literally kind of, you can give a full on presentation and then it will be a thank you referring to the sort of male counterpart, and questions will be directed through them. Full email chains can happen where I'll be sending through reports and things like that, and it will be addressed to the male colleague kind of thing. And it's like a very fascinating way. And so when you kind of are dealing with so many different departments, you're always having to be on your toes and navigating these different environments. So it's challenging, but I think that you always just have to maintain a strength in who you are and understand that, you do bring something to the table. You are just as much a part of the team. You bring something to the organization, having confidence in that. So yeah, it's interesting when you're trying to coordinate for so many different teams and constantly coming into contact with sort of different people. So
That's where the allyship really comes in as well. And having there were times when I would be out working potentially with a contractor, or actually, it could just be somebody in the investment side. And I was out with my development director, and I remember and even though there was a part of the project that we were working on that was very much like, my realm, similarly, the questions kept getting directed over to him. And
Yeah.
he would very succinctly just be like, oh, that's Stephanie's realm, or oh, Stephanie's the expert on that, or and always kind of push it back over. And so it was a more subtle type of allyship. But little things like that and just being aware of it can definitely help.
I think there's
Yeah.
a massive part to play. We touched on mentors and mentorship a little earlier. And top tip for anyone watching, don't forget that you don't need a formal mentor for somebody to mentor you. Look at your whole network. I've always seen mentors as, I have this specific query or problem. Who do I know who's the best person to speak to? And that person becomes your mentor in that particular challenge. And you go and you talk to them, and it might be, a bit of a fireside chat where you're just like, oh, I need to kind of talk about this. I need a safe space to just download. And I might say some stuff that's wrong, but this is between us. And then they help you through it. And then another problem comes up another time, or another challenge or an opportunity. And who is the best person? Even my friends, my colleagues, my entire network, that person. So there are a lot of mentoring schemes out there, and they're still very useful for a more structured approach. But I definitely think that your whole network is your opportunity for people helping and mentoring you through particular challenges.
Funny point to that, actually. Ollie wasn't aware at the time, but when she and I met for breakfast and we were talking about, everything that was going on with Socius, and she was sharing about Populate, and we're having a chat. And, of course, I've had many conversations with, women in development, and I've always found it interesting to hear their perspective. And funny enough, at that time, I was having a conversation with Muse, and she didn't know that she helped to inspire me to take that leap of faith when I had that moment of, that's massive career change, going from operational asset management and group strategy around investment over to development. And, just hearing her success and hearing, again, that vulnerability of, yeah, I had those moments. I had those moments of, what the heck am I doing? Like, why am I here? And there are things that I don't know. But again, hearing that it's okay to not know sometimes, and having that, kind of your people who sometimes prop you up a bit, and as you said, informal mentorship, straightening your crown when you need it. And actually, it was something that I already knew. I already knew in my heart that I was like, yes, this is such an exciting opportunity, and this is something I'm super passionate about. And sometimes you just need that little bit of a, yeah, come on, you got this type of approach. And if we think about the industry, Nicola and Maria, I know that obviously through the hubs and through the EDI committee, and the EDI committee was set up with the intent that it works across all committees, all hubs, really thinking about getting out there, talking about recruitment, thinking about how we attract and retain talent, and how we also develop that talent within the industry. Culture goes a long way with this, and it does sit at the heart, really, of the code of practice. So, Nicola, I know we're talking about putting together a roundtable in the Midlands in the summer this year, and just hearing from your perspective, getting that outreach into the neighborhoods to reach people who maybe never even considered real estate and the built-in environment as a career choice.
There's definitely a lot to be said, and I'm sure everybody has had this in sometime in their career. If you can't see the person at the top is like you, then you sometimes see that as a barrier to entry. So at the moment, well, I took over, to be fair, I took over as ARL chair of the Midlands Hub from two chairs. There was a boy and a girl. So we had, nice equity going on there. But if you want to attract more women into a space, then they need to see women in positions of leadership. So I think that's, internal progression of your females ultimately helps to bring more females in, because they think, actually, this clearly is a safe space for women, because I can see that there are women here and they're thriving, and, they're waxing lyrical about the great culture, etc., etc. At the Colmore Business District, when I joined the board, which now is almost about a decade ago, it was about, how many girls? Well, there was a board of 21 and there are about 5 girls. We've done a readjustment and there's now a board of 15 and now we have 8 girls and 7 boys. So it can be done, but we weren't, you know how it's like, well, we can only choose from those who apply. That's fine. I understand that you can't force anybody into positions, but if you're not showing them what is possible and who else is involved, you won't even get the applications to anything. So you've got to show the people you want to attract that it is very possible for them. So there's always internal work as well as the way that you're recruiting.
Well, oh, go on, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think accessibility is such a big thing. So I completely agree. You need to see that people at the top are like, or that there's people that, you know, like if that women are on the leadership board and that, but equally like how accessible they are. You know, I think we often forget when we look at boards or whatever that it doesn't matter how senior you are still a person. You probably, you know, you have a life outside of work and whatnot. So I sometimes find it's quite like, it helps a little bit when people show a different side to their work side. So i.e. this person, like when I'm introducing myself to new starters or whoever, I don't think I go straight in with exactly what I do at the company, because I'm probably more relatable to say like, this is my dog, and like, you know, I'm not constantly dreaming and living and thinking about real estate all the time, because that's not who I am. So I think if you're starting out in an industry, or you're a bit, is this for me? Is there female leadership? Is there not? To know that other people might just do a 5K on the weekend or enjoy a glass of rosé in a pub garden on a Saturday makes them more relatable, right? So it's just sometimes taking the people out of work, like, and understanding what else you can talk about, and then people become more of a person. And I think it's like when you send a 4-year-old to school, understanding that their teacher isn't just a teacher. Do you know what I mean?
Like a real human being.
Yeah, like they have other interests. So I think it's but how do we make that more of a thing? Because it's all very much like female leadership, and this is what we need to do, and we need to have a certain amount of women on our board. But if you can't get to those women, and if they're, you know, you need to make sure that we humanize people.
Yeah.
And coincidentally, I was actually going to kind of tap on your shoulder there for a moment, Maria, anyway, and just get your perspective on that front, and you know, also think about like representation for our teams, for the communities in which we're working, and especially if we are trying to recruit people, and we are trying to get our assets filled up, or you know, Alex, if I even think about, for instance, like the changes in advertising, you know, through the years, and you know, you kind of look back in the 50s and you see the ads now, the complete tone has changed, and the understanding of how we reach people, but you know, that understanding of our community and that representation within our community, I think is so important. And already, obviously, you've based Populate off of that feeling, you know, off of that initiative.
Completely. And I think the idea that, you know, we exist as kind of robotic people is just outdated. You know, we are human beings. We have feelings, we have emotions, and actually we are, you know, we have a responsibility as well. And I think responsibilities is something that I'm very conscious of when we are delivering large, massive mixed-use developments across the country. How do we make sure that those places are human-centered? How do we make sure that people's experiences and their lives are bettered as a result of that, whatever that might mean for them? And how do we make sure that we, as the landowner, developer, investor, whoever, funder, is cognizant of how we have a role in that, and that long-term stewardship is really important. And that's exactly what Populate is trying to do. It's trying to, absolutely, development's important, but how do we make sure that those human experiences are also really well considered from day one?
That's where groups like, I don't know, if the audience is familiar with groups like 2 to 3 Degrees, where they get people who are between 16 and 22 years old to actually feed into the needs assessment for different projects, especially around master planning, as well as to help support with apprenticeship programs. And, because actually they reach a group of people who maybe aren't university bound, where I-2020, where Alex came into the industry, is, absolutely phenomenal program. But they're, especially I think now with the cost of living crisis there, and a lot of students, let's be honest, being very burnt out after COVID, not necessarily wanting to go down that university path, or maybe can't afford to, but actually there's amazing talent there that can be nurtured through T-levels and through these apprenticeship programs, to really get people engaged and interested, and also feeding back into their local communities. I am conscious that it is 11:31.
Yeah.
That hour has gone very, very quickly. And I quickly, Charlotte, just checking to see if we had any questions on the horizon, or if it's formal sign-off time.
That's okay. I was just going to ask one question, really. Coming back to the accelerating action theme for this year, I just wondered what the panelists might like to offer their thoughts on what action can be taken this year within the rental living sector to encourage equity in the workplace. Just a thought from everyone on that.
I'm happy to go first with that. I think what we could do proactively is have more conversations like this throughout the year rather than on specific days.
Yes, please.
So I don't know. I know there's women in real estate and there's a lot that does get done, but I do think let's encourage these conversations so they're continuous. Otherwise, they tend to hit a peak and then trail off until the next year. So that's my thought on it. And like I said, let's make everybody accessible, whatever your level. This should be site level all the way through to the top. I think it's about getting everybody involved, because you can't understand everybody's perspective unless you can see it from every angle. So I think, that would be a great way to start.
Exactly what Maria said, and also making sure that men are part of this conversation too. Sometimes we can be in an echo chamber talking to ourselves, and it frustrates us because we just think, why can't I see change? And we've got to make sure that our men, boys, and young men are part of the conversation too.
Yeah, I think everyone experiences unconscious bias in different ways. It doesn't necessarily matter on your gender, but also just drawing attention and highlighting how unconscious bias can exist on sort of smaller or seemingly insignificant levels. It's not just about pay gaps or whatever that is. It happens on a day-to-day basis, and the more we can shine light on how that's happening, point it out. I think it was Nicola said earlier, sort of check yourself on that, the better.
Yeah, I think it's lead by example. So put yourself in their shoes. What would you be wanting at that particular stage for yourself if you were there? Is it more accessibility? Do you need a hug? Do you need a lesson? Do you need more information? Do you need a door opening for you? So just being aware of what people really need and making sure that we are literally helping them, like doing stuff to open those doors.
Yeah.
I think from my perspective too, and this might be slightly biased as chair for the EDI committee, which is a role that I'm really honored to have, but thinking about that inclusivity on recruitment practices into the industry, whether that be blind applications or getting out and looking at different avenues than just kind of going onto LinkedIn and typing in whatever the role title may be and hoping for the best. Really thinking about that actively, but also participating in your local hub roundtables about recruitment and talent. And also one of the initiatives for the board as well this year is not just widening our membership, but also obtaining a better depth of membership. So to Maria's point of every rung within the industry getting total participation, site teams, back of house teams, execs, everybody, so that everybody's working together and all voices can be heard.
Great.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
everyone,
so
for joining
much.
Thank you for having me, everybody. Have a great Friday.
Thank you. Have a lovely
you so
weekend.
much.
International Women's Day.
Take
And
care.
thank you.
Bye.
Thank you to
Thank
the
you so much.
audience.
Bye-bye.
Have a wonderful
Bye-bye.
weekend. Bye.